Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I am, yes, playing a driving simulator totally blind on a straight map as I get ready to talk with you guys tonight. I'm parked right now, just kind of giving the engine a couple of good revs. Yep, she seems ready to go, and we're going to take off. We're underway. Alright, here we go. That is you taking off on a journey with me. How do you feel? I need to just slow down for a second. There we go. Well, the title of the video speaks for itself. Really, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of part of why I think I recognize some of the difficulties, and I might change vehicles so little boom, boom, boom sounds come from the game or the simulator. I wouldn't even call it a game; it's more of a simulator. But what we're going to talk a little bit about is kind of a little bit about what I've been through, what I've done to persevere through it, and kind of some of the difficulties that have taken place. And so one of the things I'm going to talk about is 2003 youth group. And I mean, I had fun doing it. I was attending Scottsbluff High School, and anybody listening that knows anything about my experiences at Scottsbluff High School knows that, you know, I did have fun there. I met some nice people, some wonderful people, and, you know, of course, life happens and things happen, and some of us lost touch, sadly, although we shouldn't have. Same with Guernsey schools. But as you'll recall, in the one of the prior YouTube videos, I posted about my autonomic condition. Back then, we didn't know what it was. We knew I had it. Well, we, of it being myself more or less, I knew how to describe what I needed, but found myself in a position that was all too familiar, being misunderstood, being judged. Well, telling somebody about it one time during a Turkey Bowl event was a big mistake. The following week, I went to call and go to youth group. And received a call from a sergeant at the Scottsbluff PD saying, "Are you aware you've been advised not to call XYZ's residence?" I was unaware. I will not, for the sake of the video, I know people are going to ask, but I will not give last names. And I just got the daylight scared out of me. Thank you very much. But that was a situation. So, thank you. Thank you. So, not only did I... Okay, not only did I have that working against me, but from that point on, walking into the school building at Scottsbluff High was kind of a a difficult experience. And people would say, well, you ignored them, right? And I said, yes. But being looked at the way I was, and many of you might look and say, well, we looked up what you talked about and we didn't find anything. That is how rare my condition is. People are still trying to understand it. The adults that have it won't consult doctors to get a proper full diagnosis, so that the fewer than 20 documented cases can become more. One second. Here's the thing. That was just one example. Of many. But you know, believe me when I say this, that is a difficult story to talk about. I don't even know how many people. I think I've shared that with people in my household. I don't recall if I have. I think I have. And it's not a easy thing to say. You're not gonna hear me for a second as I'm chewing on a Kit Kat. All right, I changed vehicles here. But that really changed a lot of the landscape. For what I had to do with my life. And I really think that it really gave a whole new outlook to me about the lack of acceptance and what I was faced with and what I'm still faced with today. And the realization that some people, more like most, usually only understand what they call normal conditions. If it doesn't fit a particular narrative or what society calls normal, we tend to be forgetful. We tend to be bitter. We tend to be a little bit of aloof to what it might be. And I say that not to, and part of it is this, we all tell, we all tell people, don't judge a book by its cover, but by the content of the character. But what we often tend to do is spend a lot of time judging the book by its cover. We're very, how do I put it? We want people to understand us. We want people to get us, but we don't want to be understood or be gotten. When that happened in 2003, it was one of many situations where that was an issue. Because when 2010 rolled around and I tried to reunite, the gal that I reconnected with, well, Brandon, I'm married, no funny business. Really? That's your answer to reconnecting? I tried to be vulnerable back then and learned that my vulnerability was a big mistake. And I say that again to kind of remind people that that began a whirlwind of, well, it didn't really begin it because it had been happening a lot before in some cases, but it really amplified the whirlwind of turmoil that followed, and especially once we started getting down towards, once we started getting past the point of, other, like things. So, I mean, it's something that people often miss. We want to be accepted, but we don't want to accept. We want to be loved, but we don't want to love. That's one of the problems. A lot of times that people throw around is, well, what if this? What if this person felt this way? What if this person felt that way? Well, we'll never know. They judged a book by its cover. They never understood. I know for me, when I run into people that are different than I am in many thousands of ways, I'd rather know who they are for who they are and not for what other people make them out to be. It's the most important thing you can do. And I think knowing that, you know, you have people that sometimes don't get that, or it's not so much even just that they don't get it, but they don't choose to. It's a sad deal. So when I talk about this, I think the other question that probably should be asked is, okay, but why do you focus on the things that happen to you in explaining your perspective? Because I find that the easier way to illustrate what I'm talking about is to tell a little bit of my story. Throughout these videos, there'll be peaks of my story that I'll share. The highlights, you know, on the road, the fun experiences, the things like that, you know, they'll be shared. A lot of the other stuff. But one of the things that I want to sort of cover, and one of the things I want to look at, one of the things I want people to really do, I want people to dig into their personal archive a little bit. If you're somebody that's known me and always wondered why I did what I did, for example, why I asked to wrap around you, or whatever, I can go back and say, oh, well, he talks about in one of his videos actually what he deals with. You know, and I want you to take some time and not, and you know, and don't judge, you know, what you don't know. What I want you to do is really take some time and think about, you know, how would you feel if you were being judged? We often tend to talk about that from a perspective of what we don't like to see done to ourselves, but we often are very quick to do it to others. So that's an area that I want to see us sort of touch on a little bit, be a bit more aware of, and maybe we can, you know, maybe that's something that we can all do better in. Here's a fun fact about some of the, I mean, here's a couple other examples. 2004 wages promotional on the campus of UNL. Nobody knew I was going through abuse. I didn't speak anything about it publicly. Couldn't understand why I broke, why I wanted to be around people. A lot of times their answer was call collect, call this person, call that person. It was easy to want to dismiss and take the easy way out. And treat me differently for something I couldn't control. Than it was to say, wait a minute, he needed support. No one stopped to think about it. Because you know, back then, some of those people were into their own world. You know, I didn't say it at the time, but when I went through what I went through at the Wages Promotional, to be honest with you guys, was embarrassed. I felt bad for the people who were there, who were college students, who didn't know that one of the people sleeping there was a young 16-year-old spending a weekend there who didn't know what to do. You know, one thing you learn about college campuses is you just don't go in and disturb the people that are awake when you're supposed to be in bed. I was so tempted. But I never did. Because I figured if the people who attended the event were going to be difficult, then who else would judge? Yes. Many of you know Brandon, the guy that talks a lot. Many of you know Brandon, the guy who's long-winded. The guy who plays the keyboard. Sang for a time. Many of y'all know the Brandon who go outside no matter what the weather was before the weather hit, just to make sure things were safe and sound and what have you. But what you all did not know is there was something buried deeper. Something that could not be uncovered by way of a simple solution, something that could be covered with a lot of other things in the box. The thing many of you all that went there with me and attended some of the different events with me, or went to Wheatland schools, or went to Guernsey schools and what have you, that didn't know. You all knew the guy who you all knew talked too much. But you all didn't know why. Even more disappointing is that some of you didn't ask why. In fact, many of your some of you didn't ask. You just assumed. You just judged. You were often quick to say, why? But not quick to do anything about it. I'm actually recording I'm actually on a YouTube live stream, so. But for those of you that went to school with me, remembered how much I talked. You know, I still talk. But here's the thing. Many of you in school never asked why. A lot of times I'd hear, well, he talks too much. That's one of the biggest things that we have with him. But many people didn't ask, well, does he have, you know, what does he deal with every day? Not many people know that when my mom was married, the guy she was married to already had 2 kids. To whom he treated like gold. We weren't exactly outcasts, but we weren't exactly treated the nicest. In schools, I can remember times where teachers complain, he talks too much. You know the bad part? You had to find one person from any of those schools to approach me and say, you know, the thing we never asked you about, the thing we never learned about. Why? What it became a case of is some people that get on Discord isolate themselves, throw people away. You know, some of you watching this probably are like, okay, but why don't you tell us here? Because some things are better told to you directly. Most people's level of understanding is such, most people's level of, you know, reality is such. Their definition of life is the quiet person who never speaks. Or the person who's seen but not heard. The person whose voice is silent in the midst of all the judgment. You know, if he's quiet, then he's ignoring the naysayers, so he's more victorious than the person who speaks out against him. Herein lie my next question. How many people think back to 2005 and 6? Most people don't understand that there were decisions made for me at those times, no matter by whom, I myself didn't want to make, but I was forced to. Then there were people who said, "I'm here for you, Brandon." And after a short experience being around me, we're not comfortable with it. It was almost instantaneous. Never a lack of understanding. In fact, to get understanding required a specific level of understanding. I think one of the things that bothers the daylights out of me with this is most people don't know it, but all the times that I spoke up, there were very many arguments, very many decisions, very many, well, Brandon, you have to understand a lot of things, in which I did my best to try to understand those things I ordinarily was told to leave alone. I endured physical hardships, physical and mental abuse, verbal abuse over the years. And what many of you probably don't know is that in that span of time, I've never once put up a fundraiser for anything. I've never wanted to. I never felt the need to. You know, I wanted to, you know, be as understood as possible. I wanted to be understood as possible, but I didn't want to push the envelope. And so, a lot of times I didn't. A lot of times I just, you know, kept to my word. You know, I stayed to the nitty-gritty. Stayed to reality. Made sure that I kept things as realistic as possible. I didn't want to, you know, put pressure on people. Though I think a lot of times I probably did. I put more pressure on people than I realized. And so it's easy to file that away. It's easy to file that away in the you know, it's easy to say, you know, you should just keep quiet. You know, the people that did this to you, that, you know, maybe it's good they're not in your life. But then I think about it. Have you ever asked yourself, would the people that aren't in your life still be there if you were a different person? If you didn't have the struggles you had, would they be there? Oftentimes I think the answer is 1,000-fold yes. Because I think of where so many people are. Not from the where I am and where they are in their life and what they've accomplished and what I haven't, although sometimes I do wish I could, you know, take the clock and turn it back a little bit. Lord knows I wish I could. But I also realize the reality before me. And I realize that that's not entirely humanly possible. As much as I'd like it to be. I mean, I'd like it to be humanly possible, but I realize that it's just like they say about reality. You can't make something happen that wasn't meant to happen. You know, when I was in the marching band at Scottsbluff High School, I remember a senior that I used to sit with was easily annoyed with me because of how much I talked. I remember that there wasn't a moment that didn't go by that there wasn't a point where I was sort of feeling a little bit overused, devalued, depreciated. You know, a lot of things people probably don't realize is hang on. I think that a lot of the things that people probably don't realize is in my band classes, I recall going back at, so sorry for the pauses, guys. The nice thing is I have background audio, so you guys don't have to worry about dead air or dead silence, or at least too much silence. Let me slow this truck down. I don't usually slam on the brakes, but I'm going to slam on the brakes here. Oh. Ooh, and then I almost put the truck into reverse. Because I wasn't really wanting to drive this truck. There's another vehicle I wanted to drive here. Hang on. Let me go here. Select this vehicle number 8. Okay, 7 down and 1 right. Okay. 2, 3, down. 1 right, 1 down, and select. Okay. Okay. Oh. This vehicle's just that quiet. I switched from a loud truck to a vehicle with a very, very soft engine. But one of the things that I really feel compelled to sort of, you know, talk a little bit about and maybe reminisce a little bit over is I knew what it was like to have that support. And you all, I'm telling you, it is something else when you have that support behind you. There are things that cannot be explained in short form. Believe me when I say that. There's a lot of things that you cannot explain in short form. Especially if you know, and I want a vehicle with a bit more sound. I'm sorry, I can't do that. All right, 3 down, or, okay, here. There we go. Maybe that's the one I want. Here. Oh, well, there we go. Now I like this one. Giddy up and go. Go, go, go. There we go. But one of the things I really this reminds me of my friend's Camaro just a little bit. Except I don't think that her Camaro was a V6. This is a V6 turbocharger, dual turbo. But I was going back to talking about my band experience, going back to talking about, you know, just how that whole thing really changed the outlook. My outlook on a lot of things. And, you know, I'll have people who will probably say, you know, well, don't let the experience of one bad apple or a bunch of bad apples change the way you look at people. And that's true. You still love people unconditionally. You still try to... But what you do is you look at the situation in front of you. And you say, this is exactly what you don't want to do. These are the kind of things you don't want to happen. And I think back to the student who, you know, on one hand was so disgusted with everything I did. But it didn't dawn on her. She was dealing with a student who really had a lot of things to worry about. A lot of problems. A lot of frustration. I remember back then I even preferred female friends, for example, because of my experiences, no offense. But a lot of the guy friends I hung around still the bad experiences today. I just prefer, I've always gotten along better. Some people are that way. Unfortunately. When I say unfortunately, to some who judge, spend their time on the soapbox judging what they think is, considered normal or not normal. It's a sad thing to say. It really is. The thing about it is it's something we all struggle with, is being understood. Do you know that when you try to explain a lot of your stuff anymore, but that doesn't change this, or that doesn't change it. There are things that are right and wrong. People should know the difference between right and wrong. Right? That's understandable. But if a person is ill-treated for many years, all anyone can do is go back and create difficulties. It's sad. It really, really is very sad. It's the kind of sad where it's the kind of sad where you would love to think that people would be a tad more on the a tad more understanding, but the reality is that asking for that understanding, or not even asking for it, but trying to get that understanding is sometimes a harder task than I think a lot of people realize. That's not me saying, oh, the world's the worst place to be in or anything like that. It's just saying what we've got going on. And I think that what we need to do is we need to be a bit more understanding, and we need to stop trying to make excuses about why this sort of behavior is acceptable and why it's not acceptable. Because to be honest, there's a lot of behaviors that we allow that we shouldn't. We always say don't judge a book by its cover, but boy, we're quick to judge the book by its cover. I'll tell you guys, back in the 1990s, one of my biggest struggles in some of the elementary schools, 4th and 5th grade, was some of the worst in terms of students who didn't understand how much I talked, because, of course, they're younger students and they're hearing the teachers say, quit talking so much. And sometimes they became, accustomed to that. I wish I could reunite with some of the 4th and 5th graders I did attend school with. It would be really cool to be able to do that. That would be a really awesome deal, and I think it would be something that would be great. But who knows how many of those people have changed? Didn't want to talk to them. You know what's interesting about people reuniting? And I'm going to get a lot of flack for this because people are going to say, oh, well, this happens to people that struggle too. Usually the people that a person wants to reconnect with isn't the person who struggles for reasons that are out of their control, but who doesn't have the resources and isn't able to get as far ahead as they'd like to. Who they want to reconnect with is that person that's been successful, uber successful. That person who has that high-paying job, that one that's making the buku bucks. The person who's making the big salaries. And not the person who started it, yesterday. It's a sad and sobering fact. For them, a lot of times it's a complete, like, how quickly we want to despondently pick you out of our inner circle, or how quickly we want to, like I said, unless you're uber successful or making buku bucks, they don't seem like they want much to do with you. I've maybe only seen one person, and I think it was kind of almost by way of necessity, who reconnected with me. Well, I remember you from here and there. It's sad when you can get AI to be more accepting of a person, and not because you wanted it that way, than it is than a human being, in general. Like, oh, you have this condition? Cool, let's help you to be understood. You gotta say AI could be inaccurate. Well, it certainly can when it provides resources. Think back to, let's see, on my online years, because they've pretty well mostly 2012, 2013 was that. People that turned their backs. No sense of care, no sense of understanding. It's amazing what's happened in the past 20 or 30 years. There are many things I've not told a soul. Because if I told my entire life story, and I'm not talking about the stuff people already know about, those that are talking for years, I'm talking about the details that people don't know. It would totally reshape a lot of things. I don't think people would. I think it would drain people, to be honest with you. Realistically, I think it would drain people. Because when you want to share your story, one of the things you hope and you pray for, one of the things you look for, is you look for being understood. You know, it's one of those things where there's things you'd like people to understand, and then there's also the people in your life who've made things harder to understand just by virtue of the constant, judgmentalities, the statements that they've made. And yeah, you just heard that abruptly stop. I'm going to change vehicles here. I love that vehicle, but I want to... If I can, oh, there we go. Highway for good measure. Yes. So that. But it's kind of one of those things where I wish I knew the answer. I wish there was a simplistic answer to the bitter words of many. trails, it'll probably be something I'll never fully understand. All of this I say to say, we've got to learn to love each other. So many people I wish I could reconnect with know that that'll never happen. It might just be worth saying there are just people who don't understand. There are people who will not understand. I don't think it's just that they don't want to. I just think I asked. I want you guys to sit back as you listen to me driving here and just reflect on that a little bit. About a time in your life where, you think about things that, something that was done to you that you never really thought about as being a big deal at first. But then you actually look back at it, and you look back on it, realize how to simple, certain isn't good. I want you to reflect on that and just kind of, sort of take a step and sort of dig back a little bit and, really look at it, because the truth behind it is that there's people that say they get it. Here's the reality. Do they? No. Can't say for sure. For certain. But I told you where it started for me as far as the worst view. Actually, 2002, and other places. Meeting somebody who would have very clearly understood my condition. But was told there's really nothing you need. And then there's CDAC worker, 2017, made aware of my condition. Led to understand, and then get a phone call saying she was uncomfortable. wondering, what does that acceptance that I was just talking about, what does it actually look like? I could tell you that everybody that lives with me has been wondering the same thing about when it'll happen. See, they've had to watch me go through days of depression. Days where understanding things is a little, you know. But the good thing is that the thing I can say for sure is, for me, it's all about understanding. All about appreciation. And I want you guys to sort of sit back and, like I said, this is one of those streams where throughout the stream I talk about it. I know I can probably seem redundant. It's just how my brain works, you know. I want to, you know, and also the part I'm going to talk about with this is that I've also learned that I cannot meet people on, you know, Facebook, you know, even if it's somebody I've seen before on shows like AGT. Once the fame hits them, or they become professional, they sort of change their tune. It's like professionalism leads to the sort of lack of understanding. And, you know, it's sad because you would like for it not to be that way, but that's how it ends up being. And you know, the funny thing about it is, as I slow down really quickly, you know, the funny thing about it is, you know, you get to thinking about it and you say, well, you know, what can we do to change all this? How do we change this landscape? I think the first step toward changing that landscape is to say, you know, they're human too. Outside of your professional job, outside of your professional resources, you're still a human being. Outside of your, you know, outside of your job title, there's still the human aspect. There's still the aspect that you're still a person beyond explanation. And it's that's something we should all stop and think about. Is what do we say? would we want to, we should kind of put the brakes on like I just did. And ask ourselves, and, you know, ask ourselves, is that something we ourselves would want? Would we ever want to do that to somebody else? Would we ever want them to feel like that? I can tell you what, the answer would, in most people's cases, very likely the answer would be no. Let me see here. Let's see. I know what I wanted here. Hang on. Oh, what? But, you know, that's one of the things that I think that I like to kind of, you know, mull over, and that's one of the things I'm going to be glossing over a little bit is the understandability perspective. You know, the what do we do to understand each other more? What is the reason we don't understand each other more? How can we do better? And I think that's the biggest question. How can we do better? We can do better in a lot of ways. We can... But no, if there's anybody that remembers me from any of those places, Scottsbluff High School, from any... You know... And you... You know, I'd love to be able to reconnect. That's for sure. I'd love to be able to reconnect, and I'd love to be able to, you know, catch up. And one thing, and people would say, but Brennan, how would you feel if anybody ever apologized for not understanding you? And I'd say, well, you know, I wouldn't. I wouldn't be mad at him. I'd forgive him. Because that's how I am. It takes a lot to rebuild. But the first step towards rebuilding is understanding. That's the first step towards rebuilding. So if somebody apologizes to me and says, hey, you know, I didn't mean for this. Believe me. It'd be nice to both meet with and reconnect with people. Maybe one day. Maybe. But that's a little bit more on me. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll check out more. I'll be talking more and encouraging people in the next video for all ages.